My name is Beverly. I'm 32 years old, and 6 months ago, I walked into a courtroom thinking I was about to lose everything to my own parents. There I stood staring at the mahogany benches where my mother Martha, my father Eugene, and my older brother Roger sat confidently at the plaintiff's table. They were suing me for $250,000, claiming I owed them a debt of gratitude for raising me. 3 months of legal preparation had led to this moment, and I felt my heart pounding as I realized the people who were supposed to love me most were trying to destroy me financially. Before we dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit that like button if you're ready to hear how family betrayal can turn into the sweetest justice, and don't forget to subscribe because you won't believe how this courtroom drama ends. Trust me, what happened next will make you question everything you think you know about family loyalty. 3 years ago, my life looked picture perfect from the outside. I grew up in a middle-class family in Columbus, Ohio, where my father Eugene managed a manufacturing plant and my mother Martha worked as a registered nurse at the local hospital. Our modest two-story home on Maple Street had been my childhood sanctuary, filled with Sunday dinners and what I thought was unconditional love. My older brother Roger, 28 at the time, had always been the family's concern. He bounced between part-time jobs, never quite finding his footing after dropping out of college sophomore year. Meanwhile, I threw myself into my studies, graduating summa cum laude from Ohio State University with a degree in accounting. The pride in my parents' eyes during graduation felt like the greatest achievement of my life. When I landed my first job at Henderson and Associates, a prestigious accounting firm in Cleveland, my family celebrated like I'd won the lottery. My starting salary of $65,000 seemed astronomical to all of us. Mom would brag to the neighbors about her daughter, the accountant, and Dad would beam whenever anyone asked about my career. The decision to move to Cleveland and rent my own apartment felt natural. At 29, I was ready for independence. I found a cozy one-bedroom place for $1,200 a month in a safe neighborhood complete with hardwood floors and a view of the city skyline. My parents supported the move wholeheartedly, or so I thought. Roger's reaction was different. During family dinners, he'd ask detailed questions about my salary, my benefits, my living expenses. "Just curious about the big city life," he'd say, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I mistook his interest for brotherly concern, never imagining it was reconnaissance for something much darker. Those early months of independence were intoxicating. I decorated my apartment with furniture from Target and IKEA, learning to cook for one, building a life that was entirely mine. Every weekend, I'd drive the 2 hours home to Columbus for family dinner, sharing stories about my new colleagues and the exciting projects I was working on. My parents seemed genuinely proud, but I started noticing subtle changes in their questions. Instead of asking about my happiness or my work satisfaction, they began focusing on the financial aspects. "How much are you saving each month?" Mom would ask. "You must be putting away quite a bit," Dad would add with a calculating look in his eyes. Roger's questions became more pointed too. He wanted to know about my investment accounts, my credit score, my future financial plans. "Family should share these things," he'd say when I hesitated to answer. "We're all rooting for your success." Looking back, I can see how they were building a profile of my financial situation, but at the time, I interpreted their interest as love and support. I was the first person in our family to have a professional career, and I thought they were simply fascinated by this new world I'd entered. The red flags were there, subtle but present. Roger would make comments about how lucky I was, how easy my life had become. My parents would joke about me being their retirement plan, laughs that felt increasingly less humorous over time. But I dismissed these warning signs, chalking them up to typical family teasing. By my second year at Henderson and Associates, my career trajectory exceeded everyone's expectations, including my own. I received a promotion to senior accountant with a salary bump to $85,000. The recognition felt incredible, especially when my supervisor praised my attention to detail and analytical skills during my performance review. With my increased income, I made what I thought were smart financial decisions. I opened a high-yield savings account and began investing in index funds, watching my nest egg grow month by month. The real game changer came when I decided to buy my first home, a small two-bedroom ranch house in a developing neighborhood outside Cleveland. The house cost $120,000, and with my good credit and stable income, I secured a mortgage with a reasonable interest rate. My parents were ecstatic when I called to share the news. "Our daughter, the homeowner," Mom exclaimed. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart." That's when Roger made his first move. It was a Tuesday evening in March when he called, his voice carrying an unusual mixture of excitement and nervousness. "Beverly, I've got an incredible business opportunity," he said. "There's this guy I know who's starting a food truck business and he needs investors. I could get in on this ground floor for just $5,000. The request caught me off guard, but Roger painted a compelling picture. He talked about the booming food truck industry, the location he'd secured for summer festivals, the potential for massive returns. "I just need a small loan to get started," he pleaded. "I'll pay you back with interest once the business takes off." Something in his voice made me hesitate, but family loyalty won out. Roger had always struggled financially, and here was my chance to help him succeed. I transferred $5,000 from my savings account to his checking account, shaking hands on a verbal agreement that he'd repay me within 6 months. My parents' reaction to this transaction was telling, though I didn't recognize it at the time. Instead of expressing concern about Roger borrowing money from his younger sister, they praised me for being generous and supportive. "That's what family does," Dad said approvingly. "We help each other succeed." The Sunday dinners began taking on a different tone. Conversations increasingly centered around my financial success and what my parents called my responsibilities to the family. They'd make comments about how blessed I was, how my good fortune should be shared with those who helped me get where I was. Mom started dropping hints about their own financial pressures. The house needed a new roof. Their car was making strange noises. Dad's health insurance premiums were increasing. Nothing direct, just gentle mentions of their concerns that seemed designed to make me feel guilty about my prosperity. My friend Linda, a colleague from work, started expressing concern during our lunch meetings. "Be careful about mixing family and money," she warned after I mentioned Roger's loan. "I've seen too many people get burned by relatives who think success creates obligation." I brushed off her concerns, defending my family's integrity. How could I suspect the people who raised me of having ulterior motives? Roger was just going through a rough patch, and my parents were simply proud of my achievements. Their increased focus on money seemed natural, given my newfound financial stability. 6 months passed without a word from Roger about repaying the loan. When I finally brought it up during a family barbecue, he looked genuinely surprised. "Oh, that," he said casually. "The food truck thing didn't work out. The guy turned out to be unreliable. I'm actually lucky I didn't lose more money." The casual dismissal of $5,000 stunned me, but Roger quickly changed the subject and my parents seemed oblivious to the tension. I decided to let it slide, telling myself that family relationships were more important than money. That decision would prove to be a costly mistake. 18 months into my career success, my family's financial requests escalated dramatically. It started with a panicked phone call from Mom on a Friday evening in October. Her voice was shaky, filled with the kind of desperation I'd never heard from her before. "Beverly, honey, we need to talk to you about something serious," she said. "Can you come home this weekend? It's about the house." The drive to Columbus felt endless as worst-case scenarios raced through my mind. When I arrived, both parents were waiting in the living room, their faces grave with worry. Dad's usually confident demeanor had cracked, revealing what looked like genuine fear. "We're in trouble, sweetheart," Mom began, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "The hospital cut my hours back to part-time, and your father's company is talking about layoffs. We're 3 months behind on the mortgage, and the bank is threatening foreclosure." The numbers they presented were staggering. They claimed to need $25,000 immediately to save the house, plus additional funds to catch up on other bills. "We never wanted to burden you with this," Dad said, his voice breaking, "but you're our only hope." Roger nodded solemnly from the corner of the room, playing the role of concerned son perfectly. "I wish I could help," he said, "but you know my situation. Beverly, you're the only one in the family with real money." The emotional manipulation was expertly crafted. They talked about the memories we'd made in that house, the Christmas mornings and birthday parties, the sense of security it had provided. "This is where you learned to ride a bike," Mom said, pointing toward the front yard. "Where we nursed you through chicken pox, where you studied for all those tests that got you into college." Despite my growing unease, the thought of my childhood home being foreclosed upon was unbearable. These people had sacrificed for my education, had supported my dreams when I wanted to pursue accounting instead of a more traditional path. How could I stand by and watch them lose everything? But something felt off about their story. During dinner at Olive Garden the previous month, they'd seemed financially comfortable ordering appetizers and wine without hesitation. Mom had mentioned getting her hair done at an expensive salon, and Dad had talked about upgrading his golf clubs. I decided to do some discreet investigation before committing to such a large loan. Public records for mortgage information were available online, and what I found contradicted their claims entirely. Their mortgage payments were current with no notices of default or foreclosure proceedings. When I confronted them with this information, their responses were immediate and defensive. "Those records are probably outdated," Mom said quickly. "The bank told us the paperwork hasn't been filed yet." Dad added that they were trying to handle the situation privately to avoid damaging their credit score. Roger jumped in with additional pressure tactics. "Beverly, you're being paranoid," he said. "Why would we lie about something this serious? Do you really think we'd make up a story about losing our home just to get money from you?" The guilt was overwhelming. Here I was, questioning the honesty of the people who had raised me, loved me, and supported my dreams. Their hurt expressions and wounded voices made me feel like a terrible daughter for doubting their word. Against my better judgment, I agreed to provide the $25,000. This time I insisted on proper documentation, drawing up a formal loan agreement with payment terms and interest. My parents signed, readily expressing gratitude and relief that felt genuine in the moment. The transaction left my savings account significantly depleted, dropping my emergency fund from $95,000 to $70,000. But watching the stress leave my parents' faces felt worth the financial sacrifice. They hugged me tearfully, promising this was a one-time request and that they'd never put me in this position again. Within weeks, however, I noticed things that didn't align with their supposed financial crisis. Mom got a new car, claiming their old one had finally died, and they'd found an amazing deal. Dad booked a weekend golf trip with his buddies, explaining that it was a birthday gift from Roger. The inconsistencies were piling up, but every time I raised questions, I was met with explanations that sounded reasonable on the surface while triggering deeper suspicions underneath. The breaking point came exactly 12 months after the house loan. When Roger called me at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, his voice filled with what sounded like genuine terror. I could hear him crying, something I hadn't witnessed since we were children. "Beverly, I'm in serious trouble," he sobbed into the phone. "I need $40,000 by Friday or something terrible is going to happen to me." Through his tears, Roger spun a tale that sounded like something from a crime movie. He claimed he'd gotten involved with the wrong people, had borrowed money from dangerous individuals who were now threatening his safety. "They know where I live, where I work," he said. "They've made it clear what happens if I don't pay." The story was elaborate and frightening. Roger described men in expensive suits who had approached him outside his apartment, who had photos of our family, who had made specific threats about what they'd do if he didn't settle his debt. "I never meant for it to go this far," he pleaded. "I thought I could handle it, but these aren't normal creditors." Something about the timing and presentation of this crisis felt orchestrated, but the possibility that my brother might be in physical danger overrode my skepticism. I agreed to meet him in person the next evening to discuss the situation and see what evidence he could provide. Instead of meeting me alone, Roger brought our parents to the restaurant, claiming he'd told them everything and needed their support during this difficult conversation. Their presence added weight to his story, with Mom crying actual tears as she described her fear for her son's safety. "We've already mortgaged the house to help him," Dad claimed, "but it wasn't enough. You're our last resort, Beverly. Without your help, we might lose Roger forever." The pressure was enormous, but this time I demanded more than just their word. "I need to see proof," I told them. "If this situation is as dangerous as you claim, there must be documentation, phone records, something concrete." Roger's response was immediate anger. "You want me to provide evidence that could get us all killed," he shouted. "These people don't send certified letters, Beverly. They don't leave paper trails." My parents supported his outrage, expressing hurt that I'd require proof of my brother's peril. "How can you doubt something this serious?" Mom asked. "Do you think we're making this up for fun?" Despite their protests, I held firm on needing verification. The amounts they were requesting had reached a level that could devastate my financial security, and the stories were becoming increasingly dramatic and hard to believe. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I hired a private investigator named Janet Collins, paying her $2,000 to conduct a thorough background check on my family's recent activities and financial claims. The investigation took 2 weeks, during which Roger called daily with updates on his supposedly deteriorating situation. He described cars following him, mysterious phone calls in the middle of the night, and deadlines that kept getting moved closer. When Janet delivered her report, the truth was more shocking than I'd imagined. Roger wasn't being threatened by dangerous creditors. He was addicted to online gambling and had lost over $75,000 in the past 18 months. The money I'd given him hadn't gone to food truck investments or dangerous loan sharks. It had been fed directly into digital casino accounts. But the most devastating revelation was that my parents weren't innocent victims trying to help their troubled son. They were active participants in the deception, fully aware of Roger's gambling addiction and helping him craft increasingly elaborate lies to extract money from me. Janet had recordings of conversations between my parents discussing strategies for manipulating me, photos of Roger at local casinos during times when he claimed to be meeting with threatening creditors, and financial records showing that their supposed mortgage crisis was completely fabricated. The evidence was overwhelming and heartbreaking. The people I trusted most in the world had been systematically lying to me for over a year, viewing me not as a daughter and sister, but as a source of funding for Roger's destructive habit. Armed with Janet's evidence, I drove to Columbus on a Saturday morning, my heart pounding as I prepared for the most difficult confrontation of my life. I'd called ahead to arrange a family meeting, telling them I had important news about Roger's situation. When I arrived at the house on Maple Street, all three of them were waiting in the living room, their faces showing what I now recognized as practiced concern rather than genuine emotion. Roger looked appropriately haggard, playing his role as a man under threat, while my parents flanked him supportively. "I found a solution to Roger's problem," I announced, setting my laptop on the coffee table. "But first, I think we all need to see exactly what we're dealing with." I opened the computer and began playing the audio recordings Janet had obtained. The sound of my parents' voices discussing how to play Beverly's emotions and maximize the financial extraction filled the room like poison gas. Mom's recorded voice was clinical and calculating. She's always been a soft touch when it comes to family. "We just need to make the situation sound desperate enough." Dad's response was equally chilling. "The gambling debts are real, so technically we're not lying about Roger needing money. We're just not mentioning where it's actually going." The color drained from their faces as they heard themselves plotting my financial exploitation. Roger tried to turn off the laptop, but I'd anticipated that reaction and moved it out of his reach. Next came the photographs. Images of Roger at the Grand Victoria Casino, time-stamped during hours when he'd claimed to be meeting with dangerous creditors. Pictures of him at ATMs withdrawing large amounts of cash, always heading directly to gambling establishments rather than paying off threatening loan sharks. "I know about the $75,000, I said quietly. "I know about the online gambling accounts. I know that every single story you've told me for the past year has been a lie designed to fund Roger's addiction." The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment I thought they might finally show remorse, might apologize for betraying my trust so completely. Instead, their reaction was rage. Roger stood up aggressively, his face red with anger. "You hired someone to spy on your own family," he shouted. "What kind of sister does that?" Mom joined the attack, her voice shrill with indignation. "How dare you investigate us like we're criminals? After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us." Dad's response was the most chilling of all. Instead of denying the evidence or expressing shame, he went on the offensive about money and obligation. "You think you don't owe us anything," he demanded. "We fed you, clothed, you paid for your education. Every dollar you've earned is built on our investment in you." Their complete lack of remorse was stunning. They weren't sorry for lying. They were angry for getting caught. They weren't ashamed of their deception. They felt entitled to my money based on some twisted logic of parental ownership. "You're going to help Roger whether you like it or not." Dad continued, his voice taking on a threatening tone I'd never heard before. "We've calculated exactly how much you owe this family, and it's a lot more than what we've asked for so far." That's when Mom delivered the line that would haunt me for months. "We brought you into this world, we made you who you are, and we'll take everything you have if that's what it takes to get what we deserve." The people I'd loved and trusted were revealing themselves as strangers, viewing me not as their daughter, but as a financial resource they owned and could exploit at will. The family I thought I knew had never really existed. 3 months after that devastating confrontation, I received a certified letter that changed everything. My own parents, along with my brother Roger, were suing me for $250,000 in what their attorney called damages for breach of filial obligation and emotional distress. The legal documents were as shocking as they were absurd. The lawsuit claimed I owed them $200,000 in debt of gratitude for 22 years of child rearing, plus an additional $50,000 in emotional damages for the stress I'd caused by refusing to continue financial support. Their attorney, Frank Morrison, had crafted arguments that sounded almost legitimate on paper. They claimed I had entered into an implied contract of future support by accepting their care as a child, and that my current refusal to honor this obligation constituted breach of contract and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The paperwork detailed absurd calculations of their investment in my upbringing. $17,000 for food over 18 years, $12,000 for clothing, $8,000 for transportation to school activities, and $43,000 for emotional labor and guidance. They'd literally itemized my childhood as if it were a business transaction. I spent sleepless nights reading through their claims, amazed by the audacity of people who would sue their own daughter for money they'd stolen through lies and manipulation. But the legal system doesn't care about moral outrage. It cares about evidence and legal precedent. Finding the right attorney was crucial. I interviewed several lawyers before settling on Diane Crawford, a specialist in family financial abuse, who immediately understood the psychological manipulation tactics my family had employed. Her retainer fee of $15,000 was steep, but her expertise was essential. "These cases are more common than you'd think," Diane explained during our first meeting. "Narcissistic family members often view successful relatives as sources of funding rather than independent individuals. What makes your case unique is the level of premeditation and the evidence you've gathered." Preparing for trial meant reliving every lie, every manipulation, every moment of betrayal. We compiled 45 pieces of evidence from bank records, showing the gambling losses to recordings of my parents planning their deception. 12 witnesses agreed to testify, including Janet, the private investigator, and several family friends who'd observed the exploitation. The financial cost of defending myself was devastating. Legal fees, investigator costs, expert witness expenses, and court filing fees depleted my savings by $23,000. The emotional cost was even higher as I grieved the loss of what I'd thought was a loving family while preparing to face them in court. Roger's addiction had worsened during the months leading up to trial. He'd lost his apartment and was living with our parents, continuing to gamble away any money they gave him. The family that had once seemed solid and supportive was crumbling under the weight of their own greed and dishonesty. My friends and colleagues rallied around me with incredible support. Linda from work organized a fund to help with legal expenses, while other friends provided emotional support and testimony about my character. Their loyalty helped sustain me through the darkest period of my life. The night before the trial, I sat in my Cleveland apartment looking out at the city lights and wondering how my life had come to this point. In less than 12 hours, I'd be sitting in a courtroom where my own parents would argue that I owed them $250,000 for the crime of being their daughter. The Hamilton County Courthouse felt like a cathedral of justice as I walked through its marble halls on that crisp October morning. My navy blue suit was carefully chosen to project competence and respectability, while my briefcase contained copies of every piece of evidence that would expose my family's systematic deception. Diane Crawford met me at the security checkpoint, her confidence helping to calm my nerves. "Remember," she said as we rode the elevator to the courtroom, "the truth is on our side. Let the evidence speak for itself." The moment I entered courtroom 4B, I saw them. My parents and Roger sat at the plaintiff's table, with their attorney Frank Morrison looking for all the world like grieving relatives seeking justice from an ungrateful daughter. Mom had chosen a conservative dress that made her appear fragile and sympathetic, while Dad wore his best suit with an expression of wounded dignity. Roger avoided my eyes, completely staring down at his hands, as if ashamed of what was about to unfold. But I knew better now. His shame wasn't about suing his sister. It was about getting caught in his web of lies and gambling addiction. Judge Patricia Williams called the court to order promptly at 9 a.m., her stern demeanor suggesting she'd heard every type of family dispute imaginable. "This is a civil matter concerning alleged financial obligations between family members," she announced. "We'll hear from the plaintiffs first." Frank Morrison stood to present their case, and I was amazed by how convincing he made their lies sound. He painted a picture of devoted parents who'd sacrificed everything for their children, only to be abandoned by a selfish daughter who refused to honor her debts to the family. "Your Honor," Morrison began, "the plaintiffs invested 22 years of their lives and over $200,000 in raising Beverly Collins. They provided food, shelter, clothing, education, emotional support, and guidance that enabled her to become financially successful. In return, she has not only refused to provide reasonable support during their time of need, but has accused them of criminal behavior when they asked for help." The financial calculations he presented were detailed and seemed legitimate to anyone who didn't know the real story. Charts showing the cost of child-rearing testimony about my parents' current financial struggles and character witnesses, who described them as loving and generous people. Mom took the stand first, dabbing at her eyes, as she described the pain of being rejected by the daughter she'd loved unconditionally. Her performance was masterful, combining wounded maternal love with righteous indignation at my supposed ingratitude. "I just don't understand how Beverly could be so cruel," she testified. "We never asked for much, just some help during a difficult time. Instead, she hired investigators to spy on us and accused us of terrible things. It's broken my heart." Dad's testimony focused on the financial sacrifices they'd made for my education and the expectation that successful children would support their aging parents. He made their demands sound reasonable and traditional, rooted in family values rather than greed and manipulation. Roger's testimony was perhaps the most disturbing because he came closest to telling the truth while still lying about the most important facts. He admitted to having financial problems and needing help from the family, but portrayed his gambling addiction as a minor issue rather than the driving force behind their deception. "I made some mistakes with online betting." He said making $75,000 in losses sounded like a small error in judgment. My parents were just trying to help me get back on my feet. Beverly's refusal to help the family when she's doing so well financially has caused tremendous stress for all of us. By lunch break, I felt like I was watching my own character assassination. Without context or evidence, their story sounded plausible, even sympathetic. A successful daughter abandoning her struggling family could easily seem heartless to outside observers. But the afternoon session belonged to us. Diane Crawford began by playing the audio recordings that revealed the calculated nature of their deception. The courtroom fell silent as my parents' voices filled the space discussing strategies for emotional manipulation and financial extraction. The impact was immediate and devastating. Judge Williams' expression hardened as she heard them planning to exploit my family loyalty for money. Several jury members shook their heads in disgust as the recordings continued revealing the cold calculation behind what they'd presented as desperate family need. Next came the photographs and financial records showing Roger's gambling activities during times when he'd claimed to be meeting with dangerous creditors. Bank statements proved that none of the money I'd given them had gone to legitimate expenses, but had instead been fed directly into casino accounts and online gambling sites. The timeline we presented was damning. Every family crisis had coincided with Roger's gambling losses. Every emotional appeal had been timed to maximize my guilt and minimize my ability to verify their claims. The pattern of deception was systematic and undeniable. Janet Collins took the stand as our expert witness explaining how financial abuse within families typically escalates over time. Her professional testimony gave context to what might otherwise seem like simple family drama, helping the court understand the psychological manipulation tactics that had been employed. In cases like this, Janet explained, the perpetrators often escalate their demands while increasing emotional pressure on the victim. They exploit natural family loyalty and guilt to extract money for purposes the victim would never support if they knew the truth. When it came time for cross-examination, Frank Morrison tried to discredit our evidence by attacking my motives for investigating my own family. But the recordings spoke for themselves, and no amount of legal maneuvering could explain away their content. The real bombshell came when Diane announced that we'd filed criminal complaints with the prosecutor's office for fraud and identity theft. During our investigation, we discovered that Roger had forged my signature on several loan documents using my credit information to obtain cash advances that he'd never repaid. Your Honor, Diane said, while this civil case has been proceeding, the defendant has been cooperating with law enforcement in a criminal investigation of these same defendants. We believe the court should be aware that criminal charges are pending. The color drained from my family's faces as they realized the scope of their legal jeopardy. What they'd thought was a simple shakedown of their successful daughter had become a criminal matter that could result in prison time. Judge Williams called for a brief recess during which I could see frantic, whispered conversations between my family and their attorney. When court resumed, Frank Morrison stood to address the bench with obvious reluctance. Your Honor, given the new information presented this afternoon, my clients would like to withdraw their complaint and explore settlement options. But it was too late for that. As Morrison spoke, the courtroom doors opened and two uniformed police officers entered with arrest warrants. Detective Sarah Martinez approached the plaintiff's table with handcuffs ready. Roger Collins, you're under arrest for identity theft and fraud, Detective Martinez announced. Martha and Eugene Collins, you're under arrest as accessories to fraud. The courtroom erupted as my parents and brother were read their rights and handcuffed in front of Judge Williams. Mom's theatrical tears became real as she realized the consequences of their actions extended far beyond civil court. Roger finally broke down, completely confessing through his sobs that the entire scheme had been his idea to fund his gambling addiction. I'm sorry, Beverly, he cried as the officers led him away. I never meant for it to go this far. I just couldn't stop gambling. Judge Williams dismissed the civil case, immediately ruling that the plaintiff's claims were frivolous and brought in bad faith. She also ordered my family to pay my legal fees and issued a restraining order preventing them from contacting me directly. As I watched three people I'd once loved being escorted from the courtroom in handcuffs, I felt a mixture of vindication and profound sadness. Justice had been served, but the cost was the complete destruction of what I'd thought was my family. The aftermath of that courtroom drama unfolded over the following months like a slow-motion avalanche, reshaping every aspect of my life in ways I never could have anticipated. The immediate satisfaction of seeing justice served gave way to a more complex emotional journey that would ultimately lead to profound personal growth. Roger received the harshest sentence, 3 years in state prison for identity theft and fraud, with the possibility of parole after 18 months. His gambling addiction was finally acknowledged as a serious mental health issue, and he was required to attend counseling sessions while incarcerated. The $75,000 he'd stolen was gone forever, fed into digital casinos that had no obligation to return money lost through illegal means. My parents faced different but significant consequences. Dad received 18 months of supervised probation and community service, while Mom was sentenced to 12 months of house arrest with electronic monitoring. Both were ordered to pay restitution of $50,000, representing the money they'd helped Roger steal from me, plus interest and penalties. The financial restitution was more symbolic than practical, since their actual assets were limited and largely protected by homestead exemptions. But the legal judgment gave me the satisfaction of official recognition that their behavior had been criminal, not merely morally questionable. The emotional toll of losing my entire family was devastating in ways I hadn't anticipated. Even though I knew they'd betrayed me, the absence of people who'd been central to my life for 32 years left a void that was difficult to fill. Holidays became painful reminders of traditions that would never be repeated, and simple activities like grocery shopping could trigger memories of family meals and shared experiences. Therapy became essential for processing the complex trauma of family betrayal. Dr. Rebecca Stone, a specialist in family abuse and manipulation, helped me understand that my grief was normal and necessary. "You're not just mourning the loss of your family," she explained during one session. "You're mourning the loss of your perception of your family, which may be even more painful." The financial recovery was actually easier than the emotional healing. Within 6 months, I'd rebuilt my savings account and even received a promotion at work that came with a substantial salary increase. My colleagues had followed the case through local news coverage, and their support helped restore my faith in human relationships. Moving to a new city became essential for my emotional well-being. I accepted a position with a firm in Denver, Colorado, putting physical distance between myself and the painful memories associated with Ohio. The Rocky Mountains provided a dramatic backdrop for rebuilding my life from scratch, far from reminders of family betrayal. Creating what therapists call a chosen family became my focus. I developed deeper friendships with colleagues and neighbors, building relationships based on mutual respect rather than biological obligation. Linda from my old job remained a close friend, and we began taking annual vacation trips together that became highlights of my year. The legal victory had given me more than financial protection. It had validated my right to set boundaries and protect myself from exploitation. I learned to trust my instincts when people made unreasonable requests, and I developed the confidence to say no without guilt or extensive justification. 2 years after the trial, I received a letter from Mom requesting a meeting to rebuild our relationship. She'd completed her house arrest and claimed to have gained perspective on her behavior. After extensive discussion with Dr. Stone, I agreed to one supervised meeting at a neutral location. The conversation was awkward and painful, with Mom alternating between apologies and attempts to minimize her role in Roger's schemes. She seemed genuinely remorseful, but also couldn't resist trying to guilt me about the family's current struggles. "Roger's in prison, your father's health is declining, and I'm all alone," she said. "Don't you think the punishment has been enough?" I maintained firm boundaries during that meeting, making it clear that any future relationship would require complete honesty and respect for my independence. "I'm willing to have limited contact," I told her, "but only if you can accept that I'm not your retirement plan or your safety net. I'm your daughter, not your financial resource." We established a pattern of brief supervised visits twice a year, during which we discussed safe topics like current events and my career achievements. The relationship felt hollow compared to what I'd once thought we shared, but it provided some closure and the possibility of very limited future connection. Roger wrote to me from prison several times, his letters filled with apologies and promises to change. I read them, but didn't respond following Dr. Stone's advice that I wasn't obligated to provide forgiveness or support, just because someone expressed remorse. His addiction and criminal behavior were his responsibilities to address, not mine to enable or excuse. The most profound change was in my understanding of family loyalty and obligation. I'd grown up believing that family relationships were unconditional and that blood ties created permanent bonds regardless of behavior. The trial taught me that healthy relationships require mutual respect and that biological connections don't justify exploitation or abuse. My current life in Denver is peaceful and fulfilling in ways I never experienced while managing my family's constant drama and financial demands. I've learned to value relationships that enhance my life, rather than drain my resources, and I've developed the confidence to walk away from situations that compromise my well-being. The house I bought in the mountains outside Denver represents everything I've learned about creating security through my own efforts, rather than depending on others. Its mortgage is manageable, its location is serene, and most importantly, it's mine in every sense of the word. Financial planning has become a source of empowerment rather than stress. My investment portfolio is growing steadily, my emergency fund is robust, and my retirement planning is on track. But more importantly, I know that my financial security can't be threatened by people who view my success as their entitlement. The legal victory established an important precedent that adult children can't be sued for refusing to financially support manipulative family members. Diane Crawford told me that our case has been cited in several subsequent lawsuits, helping other victims of family financial abuse protect themselves from similar exploitation. Trust is something I approach very differently now. Instead of assuming good intentions and hoping for the best, I observe actions over time and require consistency between words and behavior. This approach has led to deeper, more authentic relationships with people who've earned my confidence through reliable conduct. The story of my family's betrayal and the courtroom confrontation that followed has become a cautionary tale that I share selectively with people facing similar situations. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who will hurt you the deepest, but that doesn't mean you have to let them continue the damage. Looking back on that terrifying morning when I walked into the courthouse thinking I might lose everything, I realize I actually gained something invaluable. The knowledge that I could stand up to manipulation, defend myself effectively, and rebuild my life stronger than before. Trust is earned, not inherited, even from family, and protecting yourself from exploitation isn't selfish. It's essential for building a life worth living. What would you do if your own family tried to sue you for your life savings? Have you ever experienced financial manipulation from relatives who felt entitled to your success? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video if you believe justice should apply even within families. Subscribe for more stories about overcoming betrayal and building stronger boundaries, and share this video with anyone who might be struggling with similar family dynamics. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your success belongs to you, not to people who think biology creates ownership. Stay strong, trust your instincts, and never let anyone convince you that love requires financial sacrifice.